The preliminary investigation report of Air India AIO 171 has revealed some developments that have created a new mystery in the aviation world. Who switched both engines' fuel switches from run to cutoff position just seconds before the crash? When both engines stalled after the fuel was cut off, one pilot asked why the fuel was cut off, and the other pilot replied, "I didn't do it." What was the reason both engines' fuel switches were turned off at such a critical moment during takeoff? What about the switches? Was there a fault? Did the pilot do it on purpose, or was it just some kind of malfunction? There have been other incidents in history where pilots deliberately committed suicide. What do those cases have in common with AIO 171? Today, we're going to dive deep and try to understand this issue. Welcome back to Lafarwa TV Videos. It was the morning of June 12, 2025, at Ahmedabad International Airport. A pretty routine day. The air was a bit warm, and the sky was perfectly clear. Some planes were boarding passengers at the terminal while others were taxiing. On the runway, a plane was landing or taking off every 5 minutes. Amid this hustle, an Air India Boeing 7878 Dreamliner was parked. Its tail number was VTNB and the flight number AIO 171. This plane had arrived from Delhi to Ahmedabad just 2 hours ago and was now all set to fly from Ahmedabad to London. Nobody knew that in a few moments, this Dreamliner would make headlines worldwide and leave a mystery in the aviation world. In the cockpit was Captain Sumit Sabharwal, 56 years old, with a total flying experience of 15,600 hours. They've been flying for hours, with 200 of those hours logged on this very Boeing 787. The co-pilot, also called the first officer, was Clive Kundar, 32 years old, with a total experience of 400 hours, and had flown the Boeing 787 for 128 hours. The report says both pilots passed a breath analyzer test about an hour before the flight and were found completely fit to fly. This same aircraft, VTNB, had just flown AI 423 from Delhi to Ahmedabad. There was a small technical issue on that previous flight, which the aircraft maintenance engineer troubleshooted and cleared the issue. Now the plane was completely ready for its next flight. Flight AIO 171 had a total of 230 passengers. The investigation report stated that the plane was fueled with 200 kilograms of fuel, and its takeoff weight was 400 kilograms, which is well within the normal range for a Boeing 787. There were no signs of any dangerous items on board. Everything was as per standard. After boarding, according to the air traffic control tower recordings, the aircraft pushed back from the terminal at 1:13, requested permission for startup. At 1:33 p.m. and 45 seconds, ATC instructed the aircraft to line up on runway 23. At that time, the wind speed was 6 knots, roughly 11 gongli Mai Sao Shi. The weather was clear, and visibility was recorded at 6,000 meters. Basically, everything was perfect for a normal takeoff. After getting takeoff clearance at 1:37 p.m. and 37 seconds, the pilot pushed the thrust lever forward and started accelerating. Keep in mind, the co-pilot Clive Kundar was handling the takeoff on this flight, while Captain Sumit's role was the plan was to monitor. According to the enhanced airborne flight recorder data, the aircraft reached VON speed at 1:38 p.m. and 33 seconds. That's 153 knots, or 283 gongli Mai Sao Shi, the speed after which aborting the takeoff isn't possible. 2 seconds later, it hit VR speed, which is 155 knots, and then at 1:38 p.m. and 39 seconds, the aircraft took off. Everything up to this point was normal. Even the CCTV footage shows that everything looked normal until liftoff. But what happened next changed everything. It changed. About 3 seconds later, the aircraft reached a speed of 180 knots. This means that even 3 seconds after takeoff, the engines were still producing thrust. Thanks to the enhanced aircraft flight recorder, it was found that right after this, the fuel cutoff switches for engine 1 and engine 2 were switched from run to cutoff position one after the other, just a second apart. The fuel supply to the engines was now cut, and their none and N2 values started dropping rapidly. In other words, the engine thrust began decreasing quickly. The cockpit voice recorder, which captures all the sounds in the cockpit, It was heard that right at this point, one pilot asks, "Why did you switch off the fuel?" And the other replies, "I didn't do it." The investigation team still hasn't figured out which pilot asked the question and which one answered. The CCTV footage shows that immediately after liftoff, the Ram air turbine, also called the RAT for short, deployed. This is an emergency power source that automatically activates if the engines shut down. It powers the plane's main electrical system, the RATs. The fact that the plane deployed its systems shows that something unusual definitely happened. The footage also showed the plane rapidly losing altitude, and the EFR data confirmed this because at that time, the N2 values of both engines dropped below their minimum idle speed. At 1:39 p.m. and 5 seconds, the ATC recordings captured a Mayday distress signal. When ATC asked for the call sign, there was no response. ATC also saw the aircraft crash just outside the airport boundary and immediately activated the emergency response. It went down. The aircraft hit the chimney of an Army Medical Corps building about 1,600 meters ahead on runway 23 centerline, then crashed into the BJ Medical College hostel. The entire wreckage spread over an area roughly 1,000 feet long and 400 feet wide from the initial impact point. In this accident, 12 crew members and 229 passengers lost their lives, and 19 people on the ground were also victims. Only one passenger survived, thanks to sitting near the emergency exit by chance. This 15-page preliminary investigation report goes into every detail. It's written in detail. After the crash, the flap handle assembly was found in the wreckage, set at a 5-4 flap position, which is a normal takeoff flap setting, and this was also confirmed by the EFR data. The landing gear lever was found in the down position, and although the thrust lever was quite burned, it was still in the forward position until the crash. Most importantly, the fuel control switches were found in the run position. This means the pilots had turned the fuel switches back on before the crash. Now, these fuel switches are normally designed so that only a person can. They can be turned on or off. Both switches have a locking mechanism on the left and right sides. This locking mechanism prevents the switch from being accidentally turned on or off. Whenever the pilot needs to open the engine fuel, both hands are required. One hand pushes the lock, while the other pulls the switch up or down. And that's the surprising part, because even if the pilot wants, they can't turn the fuel switch on or off with just one hand. Now, if the pilot hasn't turned off the switch, as the cockpit voice, if it was heard on the recorder, then who actually turned them off? And if it happened by mistake, then the question is, how did both switches accidentally get turned off? And that too, one after the other. The investigation report also found that both fuel switches were turned off within a 1-second gap, which seems like a normal human action. Later, both switches were turned back on, but by then it was too late. According to the investigation report, there was about a 10-second gap between the fuel cutoff and the restart for engine 1, and for engine 2, the fuel cutoff and restart, there was almost a 14-second delay between the engines working properly again. There's proof that both engines had started producing thrust once more. But right then, the crash happened. Now, the biggest mystery is that Flight Aviation 171 was completely fine up until takeoff. Everything from the engines to the fuel loaded was normal. The investigation team even took fuel samples from the tanker that refueled Aviation 171 and tested them in the lab, but found nothing wrong. So if everything was perfect, then why were the fuel switches deliberately turned off? Was it done, or was their locking mechanism faulty somewhere? The report also mentions another important thing. In 2018, the FAA issued a special airworthiness information bulletin. This bulletin warned about the possibility of the fuel control switch locking feature coming off. In other words, the risk of the fuel switch locking feature failing had been a concern in the aviation industry for some time. This bulletin, also called an SAB, was issued following complaints from Boeing 737 operators. This means that this issue had been reported before in some Boeing 737 aircraft. It's done. The fuel control switch design, which includes a locking feature, is the same across different Boeing airplane models, including part number 4TL8073D. This same part was installed in the aircraft VTA NB used on Air India flight Aviation 171. The FAA had warned 7 years ago that some fuel control switches were installed in a lock disengaged state. Air India skipped this inspection because it wasn't mandatory. just advice from the FAA. But on the other hand, if we assume the aircraft's fuel switch locking, the mechanism was faulty, and during takeoff, that switch accidentally turned off. But how could such a huge coincidence happen that both switches turned off one after the other within a second? And if the pilot did it deliberately, there can only be one reason: suicide. But was it really suicide or not? In 2015, on Germanwings Flight 9525, the co-pilot locked the cockpit door from inside when the captain went to use the bathroom. The cockpit voice recorder revealed that he deliberately crashed the plane into the Alps. Later, it was found out that the pilot already had a history of poor mental health. In 2013, the captain of LAM Mozambique Flight 470 manually set the autopilot to 0 feet while the first officer was out of the cockpit. The FDR data confirmed that he did this intentionally, which caused the plane to crash. Similarly, in 1999, before Egypt Flight 990 crashed, religious phrases were heard in the cockpit, and then the aircraft went into a nose-down position. According to the Egyptian government, the co-pilot's actions were the result of a mechanical failure, while the FAA considered it. A suicide mission was imagined, and in 1997, on Silk Air Flight 185, the pilot manually turned off the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder before putting the plane into a nose-down position and crashing it. Looking at these incidents in history, one common thing found in all these suicide missions was the pilot not responding to ATC. But in the case of Air India 171, the way it's being portrayed on social media as a suicide mission doesn't seem right at all, at least according to the investigation so far. Because at one point, the pilot did. The car fuel switches were turned back on. If they had planned otherwise, they wouldn't have done that. Secondly, both of them were very responsive. And 2 seconds before the crash, they even sent a distress signal to ATC from Meade. Thirdly, just seconds before the crash, the aircraft's nose was seen pointing up, and the flight data confirmed this too. This means they expected the engines to give thrust again, and maybe the plane would rise back up. If it was intentional, then what was the point of keeping the elevators in the takeoff position? What do you think about this? Let me know in the comments. Definitely let me know. Hope you all will like and share this LaFarwa TV video a lot. See you in the next awesome video.